So I'll go ahead. We'll use about 30-35 minutes for my session, and then we can have a Q&A after that. So first of all, I want to congratulate the Hyderabad Spin Network on 25 years. I think it's a great accomplishment, and it really shows a lot of passion and commitment from the community. And I wish many more such anniversaries in the future, and wish you all the success there. I Just a short introduction about myself. My name is Tathagat. I live in Bangalore. I work at Walmart Labs. I lead the strategy and operations here. I'm also doing my PhD at ISB Hyderabad, so I keep coming to Hyderabad for my PhD work. So that's my short introduction. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about business anti-fragility, the new abnormal. So I'll talk a little about that. But just to set a context, I think we had a great talk by Anand just prior to this, and he talked about some of the things that actually are a very good segue into the whole discussion on anti-fragility. He talked about how when we are actually, he talked about the medication perspective, and I think that's very well fitting into the whole thing, that we take more and more medication and we actually make our system very fragile or very rigid, and then rigidity leads to fragility there. So the whole topic of anti-fragility is, I think, very interesting there, which we shall explore in the session today. So let's get started. So these are my personal views. They've got nothing to do with my employer. Just a standard disclaimer here. So let's kind of set the context where we are today. And if we look at the whole COVID situation, I think it has continued to rear its ugly head for the last 8 months and counting. And if we see, we still haven't really seen the peak when it comes to the global numbers. Even though in some sense our numbers in India are a little better, and some of the countries are a little better, but if you look at the overall numbers globally, the numbers are still rising. So we still have a lot of challenges still in front of us. Hopefully the vaccine will have an opportunity to help, but it clearly has caused enough problems for all of us. If we look at from a business point of view, it has decimated well-established brands. I mean, these were the brands that have been around for decades, in some cases more than a century as well. And yet these many of these names have kind of either disappeared or decimated, or they have filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And I think that's very unfortunate the way as some of these things have happened there. I mean, who would have thought names like Exide, for example, or Intelsat, which launched the first satellite into the commercial satellite there, or JC Penney or Technicolor, right? We have all grown up watching the Technicolor based movies from 40s to 70s or 80s probably. And then there were some recent entrants as well, companies like Wirecard from Germany, which had a different kind of a financial sort of a challenge there, right? And even the new age companies have had challenges there, whether it is a WeWork or whether it is Airbnb. Now, Airbnb has done a miraculous recovery, right? They had the IPO yesterday, and they basically have gone to $100 billion market cap there. But then during the whole COVID time, they really had a situation where this headline was really that it took them 12 years to build, and they pretty much lost everything in 6 weeks. So it is really a miraculous kind of a recovery from there to come back to the IPO once again and build a $100 billion market cap company. So those challenges have not left individuals unaffected, right? Even though they were at the companies, but we have seen enough challenges at the individual level as well. And if you look at the global economy, it has been a fair bit of challenge for everyone. If you see the graph in the center here, then you will see that in the US economic growth, they had actually almost 12 to 15 quarters of positive growth, and suddenly there is a minus 32.9% drop in the economy from the previous quarter. And if we look at in India, even though we have been looking at, and some people disagree, but then we have seen a lot of V-shaped recovery, which is really coming back, but still by and large, it is quite a challenge there. But in the middle of all this thing, we still have some bright spots, right? These are the companies in various markets. They have done well. They have been able to really kind of use this kind of a demand, use this kind of a challenge, and create an opportunity for their consumers, for their clients, for their customers to serve them better. In some sense, while it might even look a little kind of a extreme statement, but some of the statement that you would find in popular media is that many of the companies are having a good pandemic. Now, good pandemic is a little bit of a harsh term in my view, so I don't want to endorse it. But if you see it from the point of view of when everything is going down, when all the businesses are going down, when these are the businesses that are able to not only stay strong, but they are actually having better time than even before there. Now, they are not doing it because they have been opportunistic or they are really fleecing their customers. They have been able to do in most of the cases because they have actually been able to stage a remarkable recovery in the way they look at innovation, in the way they look at operations, in the way they are able to go back and serve their customers better. So what might be some of those things is something that we will talk about there today, right? And I think it's important there because a full recovery still might be a few years away. We may not see for some of the most affected sectors like travel and hospitality, hoteling and other businesses another few years before we still go back to the status quo there, right? So I call this as the new abnormal, and this new abnormal is a term that let me explain you in this slide in next few minutes. Well, to begin with, it is not new really, even though I'm calling it new. I just want to kind of caution everyone that we should not think of COVID as something new. At least for the last 20 years, if not more, we have already been seeing a lot of those kind of things, right? Starting with the dot-com during the 2000s, and then followed by the 9/11, and then we had the SARS crisis in 2002. We had Hurricane Katrina, we had Hurricane Sandy, we had the 2008 financial crisis, which actually decimated a lot of capital itself there, and so many names at that time. I mean, names like Lehman Brothers or Freddie and Fannie and bunch of other names just went down at that point in time, right? Then we had the Greek debt crisis, and our own GST and demonetization has been nothing short of a major shock to the whole system there. Now, the opinions vary depending on your own understanding of the economy and your political affiliation. You might fall on the extreme of that you like those GST and demonetization, or you don't like it. But we are not here to debate on whether it is good or bad. What we are here to understand is, well, how are these shocks really? There are some types of system which get decimated by those shocks, whereas there are some other kinds of system that actually thrive on these shocks, and that's what we'll understand in this conversation here. Now, in the old world, it used to be business as usual. So allow me to explain that. So try to think that, let us say there is a landscape, right? And there are hills and valleys, and it's a three-dimensional landscape, right? Now you take a tennis ball or a golf ball and you kind of bounce it somewhere. And then what will happen is, because it will find some local minima, it will kind of settle down into that pocket, into a small valley somewhere, and it will find some kind of a new normal. And that is how we have used the term the new normal, right? So there was a stable state and there was some kind of a shock. The shock resulted in the golf ball moving around here and there, and it is settling down into another place that we call as a new normal. That new normal might be higher than it or lower than that, but it was kind of a simple metaphor to think of it. But look at what has happened today. It is still the same landscape with some changes. So instead of thinking of one landscape which has only one axis being changed, try to think of multiple changes happening at the same time. So you have multiple of these kind of sort of, if you remember those kind of Takeshi Castle or some kind of those games series that as a children we have watched, you have multiple of those kind of a thing moving around here and there. So the whole notion of finding a new normal doesn't kind exist there. The moment it finds a new normal, that changes, and the golf ball is again getting tossed around in this whole thing there. So if net, if you see what is happening is, there is no such thing as a final equilibrium. There is no such thing as a final state. There's no such thing as a new normal. And instead of that, using the term business as usual, I prefer to use the term turbulence as usual, because if anything, we are going to be guaranteed the turbulence as usual all the time there, right? And that is what I call as the new abnormal, because the whole idea in the future is that you cannot simply say, okay, let's go and find the new normal and then things will be fine for next 10 years. No, at best it might be fine for 3 months, maybe it will be fine for 6 months, and something else will come and change the situation completely. So we have to really mentally get used to the world where it is changing all the time, where it is turbulent all the time, and we have to make some sense out of the situation and build some sanity out of the whole thing. So that is really the whole game that we are here. In this game, agility is the table stakes, because you have to have agility in the system. If you don't have agility, you will not be able to survive a day in that, right? Because if you imagine, if as a golf ball you are not able to move when the whole landscape is just dancing around you, what's going to happen to you? You will get killed by the whole competition there, by the whole external environment, by the changes in the regulatory environment, and so on. So agility is a table stake, but agility itself may not be enough. We might need something beyond it, which we call as anti-fragility, right? So let's explore what is anti-fragility. Now, before that, I want to give you an example. And even though Thanksgiving is not something that we celebrate in India, but we just had the Thanksgiving a couple of weeks back in the US. And there is a very interesting story I want to tell you about the whole Thanksgiving turkey. So imagine that you are a turkey, and you have obviously no idea about Thanksgiving or anything, and all you see is a human being who is taking care of you. And every day the human being comes, he feeds you, who he gives you a bath, he pats you, he takes care of you, he takes you for a walk, and you think my human being is really the best human being in the world. He takes care of me, everything is fine. Every single day you see that it is a repetition of the previous day. So your belief system, your mental model is getting firmed up every day that my future is going to be a linear extrapolation of my past, right? Because that's exactly what happens there. And let's say this continues for 1000 days. So for 1000 days, your belief system is it keeps getting strengthened and strengthened all the time. And then suddenly something happens on 1001st day. Well, what really happens in the life of a Thanksgiving turkey is then on the 1001st day, there is a surprise. And suddenly, lo and behold, the turkey is reduced to a dinner, because that is a Thanksgiving now, and it is a Thanksgiving turkey there. Now, what just happened there? The turkey was living under the business as usual scenario, and turkey was making plans accordingly, but it was hit by something that we call as a black swan event. And a black swan event is essentially a kind of an event which is totally unpredictable. We have no idea what's going to happen, and it has a very high consequences. And prospectively we cannot predict it, but retrospectively we can explain that. So once it has happened, we can say, hey, this was really a Thanksgiving turkey, and that is the reason why it happened. But when the turkey is sitting in the present and looking into the future, there is no way we can really kind of do that. It is written by the Nicholas Taleb book by the same title, Black Swan, and basically he argues that these black swan events are information asymmetry. So in this particular case, the swan, like in the case of turkey, the turkey doesn't know, but the human being knows what's going to happen on 1001st day. So there is an information asymmetry that is really happening there. Now, the thing is, all of us are being subjected to these black swan events all the time, right? We don't know in many of the cases, but somebody else knows. Take the case of GST. We do not know what's going to happen, but the government knows that there is going to be a GST. Maybe there is a demonetization. We don't know what's going to happen, but the government knows that there is a GST happening. You take the case of COVID situation there, right? Now, maybe after the vaccine comes, there will be a little better hope for it, but there could be something else that's waiting to happen there. So how do we deal with that? In most of the cases, the moment there is a black swan event, we become so fragile that we are not even able to move forward. We just shatter there, like a flower vase, which cannot really handle those kind of shocks there. So what is the solution for that, right? I want to show you a short 1 minute video before we keep going further. I hope you are able to watch the video, and I can play the sound as well. hear the sound on my own laptop, but I hope you were able to hear. But in case you missed it, it's only a background music. And the message that I want to convey is that when there is a mouse that gets trapped in a mouse trap, what happens in the conventional wisdom is that the mouse dies. But here we have a super mouse which actually is able to not only use that shock, it is not fragile, but it is actually displaying a certainly different behavior. It is actually using the mouse trap to basically do the muscles, the push-up, and it is actually behaving in a very different manner. So what do we have? What do we have a name for it? What do we want to call it there? Let's keep going there and see if we are able to build something around that. So Nicholas Taleb really calls this as anti-fragility. And he says that, hey, some things benefit from the shocks. They thrive, they grow when exposed to volatility or randomness or disorder and the stress. They love adventure, risk, and uncertainty. And yet, in spite of the ubiquity of the phenomena, there is no word for the opposite of fragile. A lot of times, if you ask people what is the opposite of fragile, they will say strong or they will say resilient. But anti-fragility is really going beyond the strength, beyond the robustness, beyond the resilience into what he calls as anti-fragile. And anti-fragile is really, he says, that they not only resist the shocks, they basically love the shocks because they actually get better at the whole game because of the whole idea of the impact there. And in some sense, he says anti-fragility is really the boundary between living and non-living. Because if you think of a stapler, right, on your desk, a stapler on your desk, if you throw it, toss it on the wall, or if you throw it on the floor, nothing is going to happen to it. It is basically strong. If you take a flower vase and you drop it from the table, it's going to shatter into pieces because it is fragile. But is there a third category which actually, if you bounce something, if you throw something, maybe two of those things come out of it? What kind of a name are you going to give to that? So let's just explain a little bit there. First, I want to use the whole mythology of that, and then we will come to little examples part of it. So he says, for example, think of the Greek mythology, and you have this whole sword of Damocles hanging on it. You are very powerful, everything can happen to you, but then it's just the one sword that's going to just make the whole thing go away there, right? So in some sense, that is that one small chink in the armor, that one small weakness that can actually blow the whole thing apart there, right? And that is really a fragile kind of a property. If you look at a resilient property, he talks about the whole mythological bird known as phoenix. And phoenix is actually a bird that when it burns down, it actually rises from its ashes. But every time it rises, it goes back to the same state as before. So if there is a shock to it, it gets burned down, it again comes back alive and again is born as a bird there. So it's resilient to that shock there. But then he gives the whole idea of the multi-headed hydra. When Hercules was fighting with the hydra, every time Hercules would take a sword and cut the head, two heads would appear out of the hydra. So Hercules didn't know how to fight that thing because every time you cut it, it's going to grow double the heads there. And that is the whole idea of anti-fragility. The moment there is a stress, the moment there is a shock, the moment there is a chaos, it thrives on it, right? So that's kind of the mental framework I want you to keep with you, and we will develop that and see examples of how one might be able to become anti-fragile, whether it is a business or whether it is an individual point of view. So these are some of the principles that are from his book by that title, and these are some of the things that I've been seeing in my own work and learned and picked up from some of the case studies and business examples. The first thing I like is really coming from the whole world of martial arts. In the martial arts, you would have seen, for example, the way they basically deal with that is you might have a super-sized, big opponent, and you are really very small in physical terms. And how do you fight that? Because that sumo wrestler or that individual is carrying so much of energy that you cannot fight with that energy. And the best way the martial arts really teach you is that you don't really fight that with more energy, but you deflect the whole energy there, right? So that's to me a great principle of how you harness that energy instead of fighting that energy. And we'll see some examples of that in the one. The first example I want to offer here is the airlines business. Now, nothing has probably seen as much as the airlines business if you see in the last 20-25 years. And this graph actually shows that despite the number of shocks that airline industry has seen in the last 20-25 years, it continues to grow. It has grown the traffic 4 times globally. And in fact, the biggest crisis was after 9/11, when if you see in the graph for almost 6 years, the graph was really kind of flat there. Nothing happened. But if you take a long-term snapshot, you would see that really the business has continued to grow there all the time there. So I think the key principle we are talking about is exploit the crisis. If you allow the crisis to go to the waste, that is the biggest problem there. Use that opportunity and look at how can you really find the gaps in your system and keep tweaking them all the time. Because if you don't take care of it, the system will grow robust over a period of time, and a robust system will, the moment there is one shock there, it's just going to shatter the whole thing there. So you keep using it as an opportunity to kind of build that thing there. Take the example of Disney, and Disney is, I think, a wonderful example. This particular strategy graph or a strategy map was created by Walt Disney back in 1957. And he imagine, I mean, if you look at it closely, you will find that even 60 years back, more than 60 years back, Walt Disney had actually a strategy that there will be a multiple of these things. So there is going to be a Disneyland, there's going to be merchandising, there will be magazine, there will be comics, there will be TV related things, there will be movies and theatricals, right? And today, look at what is happening. Nobody is going to Disneyland, right? They just announced that they might have to close down or actually lay off more than 30,000 people there. And yet, if you see, yesterday's news was that they are going to have more than 360 million plus subscribers for Disney Plus now, and probably a stiff competition to Netflix in the coming time, right? And if you think about it, that strategy they have pursued over a period of 60 plus years. So even if one of the business elements is going down, the other one is able to pick it up, and as a business entity, they are able to continue marching ahead there. So otherwise, if you just have a single point of failure, imagine what would have happened. It would have become yet another name that we saw in the beginning, where because of the COVID shutdown, the whole business collapses. But here they are able to just shift their mass into somewhere else, and they are kind of able to keep moving further there. Building a digital business model obviously is a great idea in today's context, because it allows you to really kind of look at the ability to connect, whether you are a B2B or a B2C business, to see how you can leverage technology, reduce your cost of operations, reduce the friction in the processes there, and kind of do that. I will not have time to really go into the digital business models, but I just wanted to introduce here in terms of really seeing that the digital business models, if you don't evolve, look at what has happened, for example, to a taxi aggregator service or an Uber or a WeWork or some other businesses. They are completely reliant on a physical real estate based models, and that becomes a challenge. And on the other hand, if we look at Airbnb, even though they are still reliant as a last piece, last mile is still the physical thing, because they have somebody has to go and stay in a physical property. Their platform is something that really creates the ability to be rated as $100 billion business. So I think that to me is a great way to put it in terms of the digital business models. So what are some of the things that the businesses could do? What are some of the things that Nicholas Taleb talks about which allow us to kind of develop this idea further? The first thing he says is embrace uncertainty. So work on new areas. So for example, if you think of Google, for example, a lot of Google's ideas came in the initial years as the Google 20%. Right, these were the experiments that they started working on, and they basically said, okay, these seem like an interesting perspective, why don't we just go and develop it? It was not part of the business plan, it was not part of the annual roadmap. They just continued to pursue them, and whether it is a Gmail, whether it is a Google News, whether it is a Google Maps, and many of these products came out of that. Right, the second thing would be accept the risky projects. Sometimes we stay away from the risk because we say, oh, risk is going to really make it very difficult because we don't want to sign up for more risk. Well, the whole science of anti-fragility, the way Nicholas Taleb talks about, is that actually you become more anti-fragile by signing up for the risk than avoiding it. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So in this COVID time, many of us are really working from home and we are working in quarantine. It is absolutely important and we should not really take it lightly. So no argument on that. But remember one more thing, the more we are avoiding the exposure to other human beings, We are also reducing the opportunity to basically keep developing our immunity levels, because we are not subjecting to other kind of bacterial or other infections. So our immunity level is going down there all the time. I'll give it from a personal example. Some of you might be aware, I used to be a scientist in defense, and I got a chance to live in Antarctica for 16 months back in the early 90s. So when I went to Antarctica in 93, I stayed there, which is the coldest place on Earth. There is no bacterial life. Hopefully, there is no COVID there as well. And for the whole 1 year, 1.5 years that we were there, we did not catch cold. We did not get any fever. We did not get any bacterial or viral infection there. One would have said our immunity was high. It was very high because we were not getting anything. But the reality was that the Antarctic weather doesn't have any bacterial life, doesn't have any viruses, and hence we did not catch any cold or anything. And over a period of time, because of not being exposed to it, our immunity levels came down. The moment the new team came from India in 95, in late 94, 95 time frame, suddenly we all caught up basically the virus, and then we were coughing and sneezing all the time because our immunity level was so weak there. So that is the point I'm making it, that if we protect ourselves from some of these things, we think that we are playing safe, but in reality we might be signing up for more risk there. So it might be a good idea to think of signing up for some of the risky projects and proactively seek some problems and say, okay, why don't we really go and do something? So that's the first part here. The second part is that by doing it, it allows us to develop some options around the whole thing. So we acquire certain new capabilities, and I'll give an example of a new capability. So for example, when the COVID struck back in February in China, there is a company by name BYD, and some of you might be familiar with BYD, which is Build Your Dreams. BYD is really the world's largest electric car battery maker, right? So their batteries are used in the electric vehicles there. Now, the moment COVID struck, they realized that probably nobody's going to buy these car batteries now. We need to think of what we can do now. They have people, they have plants, they don't have capability in the other ones, but the time is short. The ability to serve the community is there, that we can do. So what do? They literally overnight change themselves into the world's biggest face mask maker, right? I mean, they took about 3 to 4 weeks for that, but imagine in 3 to 4 weeks, the world's largest car battery maker becomes the world's largest face mask maker. And that is the kind of capability they were able to acquire because they were extraordinarily nimble in their mind, in their ability to really say, okay, we have never done it, that's fine, we will just go ahead and take some risks and do that thing. They could have failed miserably as well, right? And I have seen many examples, I'm sure many of you have seen as well. There was one example that comes to my mind, which is a restaurant in Australia. And that restaurant said, hey, nobody's coming to eat at the restaurant because of COVID. What do we do now? And they said, well, we have the real estate. We already have the contract with our suppliers, because every day, because of making the food, they anyway bring us a lot of vegetables and condiments and supplies. Why don't we change? And we are already in the community. People know us. They just converted their business from being a restaurant to being a grocery store, and by doing it, they were able to actually leverage the same strengths that they already had, and they were able to actually acquire new capabilities and serve the customers better. So those are some examples that might illustrate you of what I'm talking about here. Nicholas Taleb also talks of two more things, practice via negativa and barbell. Let me take one slide each and quickly talk about them as well. So he talks about via negativa as a very good example, and I really liked Anand's session because he talked about some of the things, especially when it came to diabetes and other examples from the human health. And actually, the whole idea there is that when somebody has a blood pressure or a diabetes, then we are basically giving a lot of pills there and a lot of medications there. But there are those naturopathy or Ayurvedic, and actually Nicholas Taleb talks about this place in Russia somewhere or Europe somewhere, where they actually allow you to basically go there, and then you are actually away from all the things. So you remove everything from your diet, you remove everything from your lifestyle, and that's how you heal yourself again, actually. And then so it's very similar to our kind of probably the Ayurveda or other kind of systems there, where we are saying medicines are not needed. Your human body is enough there, but if you remove these negative causing elements there, you eliminate the noise there, that will again bring back the whole part of it. So that is the way they basically look at the whole via negativa there. And if you think of it, some concrete examples that come to my mind is actually one of them is from Honda, where Honda has this whole philosophy of kick out the ladder. And from the time Mr. Honda founded the company 70, 80 years back, that has been their thinking in terms of if there is a steady system which is running very well, you basically remove something out of it, and that kind of and then people have to become little better. They have to improvise, and they really have to kind of become more efficient out of the whole thing there. And then finally, he talks about the barbell strategy, which is really those who are from finance world would really appreciate it. So what happens is, just like a barbell, he says that you basically look at the black swan, and there might be positive black swan and there might be negative black swan. So what you do is that negative black swan has you basically secure your investments so that you don't lose any further. Think of it like futures or options in your portfolio strategy with your stock market. And then if there is a positive kind of a thing there, that means a positive black swan means the downside is very less, but the upside is very high. There you take a lot of risk, because every risk you take, in case it goes bad, it's not going to take you down there. It's only going to be at the same level. And if it goes up, then the investment is like the ROI is like 5x or 10x kind of a thing there, right? And the way you are doing that is by these kind of things, like building a lot of options or doing a lot of side projects or building a lot of risky ideas and so on and so forth there. So that's the kind of a thing. And one thing that specifically we talk about is the whole safe to fail approach, where the whole idea is that you don't really go out and kind of say, I will do one big grand experiment, but we really talk about in the context of complex systems and say, hey, how do we really deal with that? Let's do multiple of safe to fail experiments. One experiment by itself, if it fails, it's not going to kill us. But bunch of these experiments, if we do, we are slowly and steadily kind of building the whole resilience, going to the point where we are now developing things that we never thought we could have done that before there, right? So that's the way to do that. And there are a lot of companies which basically do that. I just want to give quickly an example of Netflix, which actually does this whole idea of introducing the shocks to the system very well. And when they build the chaos monkey, the idea is that you subject your system to so many extreme shocks that the system has to get stronger every time to be able to basically cope up with those kind of things, rather than protecting it and saying, oh no, you cannot really touch it, nobody should be allowed to do that, and so on and so forth. And now they talk of not just chaos monkey, they talk of latency monkey, conformity monkey, doctor monkey, janitor monkey, bunch of these kind of things, and they keep making their systems anti-fragile all the time there. And the last point I want to just talk about is the whole idea of looking at a system like complexity. And again, thanks Anand for really bringing that point there, that in our life, in our system, in our organizations, nothing is linear. It is all non-linear. And unfortunately, we apply the linear methods to solve a non-linear problem. Whereas a far better way would be to look at it from a complexity lens and say, how do we really solve this system there, right? Because a linear system would, x is equal to y is equal to fx, and you are thinking that there will be a linear relationship, but there may not be that kind of a relationship. In fact, most likely there will be no such kind of a thing. If you go with the theory of chaos, it's going to have a little bit of a chaotic sort of order in that, right? So what is a complexity mindset? First of all, we need to accept that there will be a complexity. You will not have a predictable finite state machine there. Secondly, it creates opportunities. So if you use it creatively, while it brings a lot of constraints, you can also use it really for very, very unique opportunities there. And basically tap those opportunities is the key thing there. So that's really the point of view I wanted to just bring here. And lastly, just to summarize, the key message that I wanted to talk about is the point that Nicholas Taleb talks in his book, where he says it is the same wind. If on one hand, when it comes and hits a candle, it basically extinguishes the candle. But if there is a fire, it energizes the fire. So it is the same black swan event. It is the same kind of a impact to the business that is happening there. But it's up to you whether you have really built yourself as a candle, in which case one gush of wind will come and it will just blow you out. Or if you are really as a fire, that the more the wind comes, the more you really get energized and the more you get bigger there. Anti-fragility is really that behavior like a fire, whereas candle is more like a fragility. So the idea is not to protect it, but the idea is really to liberate it by really developing a bunch of these options and developing that risk and really building that kind of a complexity mindset, which allows you to really leverage some of these things there. So with that, I would like to close my talk here. I hope it has given you some idea there. I will stop sharing it. So I'm hoping that I probably can, if there are a few minutes, I can have a conversation on that.
Yeah, thank you very much for a good session. It was really informative, Tathagat. And there is a question for you. Could you please let us know one agile model which Walmart Lab is following during the pandemic times to achieve business agility and ensure value flow across the organization?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the company, so I will stay away from that question. But I will just refer to the to basically whatever is in the public domain. If you look at the way we have been able to think of some new products and new ideas like ship from the store, it's an opportunity that shows that suddenly we had a situation to serve the communities, and we found that if we could use our stores, because of the whole store that we have 11,000 stores globally, that allowed us to really serve the customers better. So that's one example of it. Even there have been cases where we have used our stores for drive-in testing and even for entertainment purpose, where some of them have been used even for the drive-in movie theaters, because you have the whole store available there. As a result of this, if you look at the last 3 quarters of results, you will find that our e-commerce and store, both the businesses sales have revenues have gone up, because customers have expected that level of service from us, and we have been really agile to kind of serve them from the whole. One example I also want to talk about is the whole, which is really the online grocery pickup and curbside pickup, which is because of the social distance and other norms, people were a little wary of coming to the stores. So what they can do is they can give the order, and then they can really basically pick the items from the curbside. They don't, some associate will pack up and bring it outside at an appointed time. They just come to one of the bays there and they just pick it up in the car and they leave there. They don't even have to come to the store. So some of these have been examples of consumer facing innovations. I hope it helps.
Yeah. So there is one more question. It is unconscious state of requirement for business being anti-fragile. What is the success rate for being anti-fragile considering various businesses that are today?
See, if you look at a lot of businesses, they have. I mean, if you look at the whole retail itself, because I come from retail. On one hand, there have been situations where a lot of retailers have gone out of business. On the other hand, a lot of retailers are able to basically do that. Or if you look at education, education is a great example of that. On one hand, we have a situation where everybody needs to go on a video call and really needs to do that. On the other hand, we have a situation where a lot of workforce which is not agile enough, either from technology point of view or from the skill point of view, is not able to adapt so well there. So on one end, we have things like Byju's, for example, or Whitehead Junior, or now Coursera. I was reading about it. They are planning to go for an IPO next year. I think those are great examples that despite COVID being there, they have continued to grow from strength to strength. So I think those are some examples that come to my mind.
Yeah, so one more question from Krishna Praveen. Any examples of proactive risks that organizations can take to become anti-fragile?
Yeah, see, the whole idea of signing up proactively for things. So look at Toyota is a great example. Toyota started working on their hybrid car Prius, I think back in early 90s, when nobody was even asking for it. There was no need for it. There was no market situation. There was no consumer research that would have told them that people are asking for a hybrid car. But they started working on it proactively. And it took them multiple years before they launched it. And I think the first time they came was in 97, if I'm not wrong. And 97 was the time when, even without asking, and it was maybe in some sense people would have said it is ahead of its time, and there was no market need. But that's the kind of a time it takes for somebody to be proactively ready with a new technology there, right? Because if everything has to be done just in time there, I think new technology which requires a lot of investment, lot of R&D, lot of gestation period can never happen, because you have to start thinking 7 years back or 10 years back there, right? So that's the point I'm saying. I think you have to really look at reading the weak signals. A great company is not great just because of the execution alone, but it also must spend some of its dollars in kind of going from exploitation to the exploration mindset, right? Most of the companies, we see that they get stuck in the whole exploitation mindset, which means they have a business model and they just keep milking the business model, but they don't really put some of their accrued profits into funding some new models
Research.
that will become like the futuristic models of tomorrow.
Yeah, correct. Okay, so one more, will diversification help companies in times of turbulence, because all units may not be hit?
I think it's quite likely that diversification could be, because you don't have one single fell swoop in which everything gets decimated or everything gets done all the time there, right? Even in our investment strategy, when you see that people are really worried of putting the money in the stock market, you see that money going into the gold, or you see that money going into the real estate, and that is just how things happen there, right? You never see that totally the market really goes down, because you always have some kind of so same is the case with the companies. If people are not going to the stores, maybe they are going to the e-commerce websites. If people are not buying let us say a 56-inch flat TV, they are probably buying a lot of toilet paper, or if they are not buying toilet paper, they are probably buying a lot of vegetables and groceries and general merchandise. So the preferences keep changing there. I think agility to me is really all about the pace at which you match the external change versus the internal change. If the external change is very fast, but internally you are not able to adapt to that change, you will not be able to do that. And if every time you have to wait that somebody has to come and validate that market for you, and then only you are going to build it, well, you might have lost the race, because those who have been
Yeah.
early to the game have probably already taken most of the market from you.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's the questions. Thank you very much for such an informative and well thought session. Thank you, Tathagat.
Thank you,
Okay,
Sujal.
colleagues.